Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. It's a lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's very special live stream. Well, before we get on to the main subject and bring our guest on, there's some news I have to give you. First, some fast news facts. Apparently, the truth told by independent Facebook users was an issue for fact checkers on Facebook. Let's have a look at what Facebook users said about having the jab. And there are lots of them. And you can see they all regret having this vaccine. Nira here, for example, says, I regret taking this vaccine. I'm so ill. I feel like I'm dying. I hate being ill. And if we continue on, you can just see it continues on and on and on. All these people saying, damn, I regret taking the vaccine. Well, guess what happened? This page, believe it or not, has been taken down by Facebook. I'm not joking. Hang on, let me just sort this out. I just want to show you what happened, what Facebook did to this page. Here we go. Now, that's what happens when people report how they feel about having the jab. Sorry, this content isn't available right now. Now, if that isn't censorship, I don't know what is. So now it's not just commentators who are being censored, but those who are reporting on the real life effect of the jabs on them personally. It's only on lovinglifetv.com that we can cover issues that are censored by big tech. Big Pharma's media lackeys, journo terrorists have struck again, this time unleashing a wave of death threats and vitriol against Dr. Joseph Mercola of Mercola.com, who's just announced he's been forced to take down his entire website of articles and interviews. His work represents 25 years of research and writing about nutrition, wellness, disease prevention, and natural immunity. And the taking down of his site is no doubt being celebrated by the pharma-funded criminals who are conspiring with big tech and the White House to target and destroy the most influential educators on nutrition and wellness. On a more local subject for South Africa, the economic freedom fighters did hold a peaceful protest in the Phoenix area of KwaZulu-Natal earlier today. About 500 people attended. Let me show you that. Now, I would suggest that would be quite frightening for the local community. And I will be publishing a video in the next few hours with a lot more coverage and comment about that protest that took place at Phoenix. All right, tonight I talked to Werner, the Chief Operating Officer of Solidarity, regarding community participation and safeguarding communities and businesses. Please remember to subscribe to Loving Life on YouTube and to register on Loving Life, the platform we are transitioning to. If you have any questions for Werner, please precede them with the words Loving Life so that they stand out in the side chat. I'll get Werner on. Here we go. Hi, Werner.
Hi, Scott.
How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I don't know if you've heard, but the President Ramaphosa is going to make an announcement tonight at 8:30, and he's going to do a cabinet reshuffle. And Keyser has resigned as well.
Oh.
So I think we're in a situation where we can say all our problems will be solved now. There's going to be a reshuffle or a recycling of cadres rather.
Well, look, I tell you what I would like to do if you'd like to participate in this, Werner, is at 8:30 when he goes live. Perhaps we can cross to that, and then you can commentate on what he says. What do you think about that?
I'll do my best. I'm more than welcome. I think it would be interesting recycling rather of the cabinet rather than a reshuffle.
Yeah.
We know that Ramaphosa is in a difficult position in the sense that he's made promises to ultimately to restructure the economy. So he has to bring reinforcements there. And then he had to get out the most rotten of all the rotten apples over there. So it would be an interesting shift, but I don't hold my breath for any sort of high-level big change coming. It will be a more forceful, I believe, approach to the resolutions of the ANC, which we know ultimately lead to. But let's do that. I'll be happy to.
Fantastic. And look, I have to say that as long as Ramaphosa doesn't make Bekesela his Minister of Finance,
yeah. Well, the talk is that Bekesela is on his way out, and also a few of the security cluster ministers there, that cluster that was in charge of the riots and informing the people and appropriating a response. So it would be an interesting reshuffle. So let's see what happens.
Well, all I can say is that when the two ministers who run the army and the police only have a teacher's diploma, it doesn't say much for the ability to actually run such an important part of the government.
Exactly, but we do know that the objective standard for the ANC and their cadre policy, it comes the party and your loyalty to the party, and the secondary considerations are the things that we talk about. And you see that more and more in the judiciary and other spheres of government, where the credentials from a struggle perspective becomes more important than anything else. And that's a large reason why this country is where we are today.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if you were in Ramaphosa's position, who would you bring into the cabinet? And I would just throw in this little red herring, and that is that John Steenhuisen has put his hand up as well.
He's retracted it again.
Yeah, well, you never know with him, do you?
And Roland Schoeman as well has thrown in his hat in the ring. I don't know if you followed that.
No.
The Olympic swimmer. Yes,
Oh,
Olympic
okay.
swimmer, gold medalist, I believe, silver medalist, world champion in some of the disciplines. He has written a quite extensive letter to Ramaphosa to say that I want to be Minister of Sport. So it would be interesting. But on my side, to be honest, Scott, I don't know how to go about to start and forming a cabinet, because the entire structure of the cabinet is as such that it would be very difficult to move beyond party lines. So if we distinguish all of that, I would firstly make the cabinet at least, I want to say half it, but I think we can go even further than that. We've got a cabinet of more than 70 people already. So there's that sort of reformations that needs to happen, because it's too large, and we need a focused decentralization of power from the central government, and to understand what government's role is. And when you've got those points in the bag, then it would be more sensible to start thinking of who would be the best position in that regard. But I'll give it a thought, and maybe some names will come up when the cabinet is announced. But we don't have, if you look at the cadres, we don't have this many options to pick a few good ones. But we've got, let's see what happens.
Well, don't you think that if they use the Singapore model, which is meritocracy, that would be a far better solution for South Africa?
Oh yes, absolutely. Singapore was a fascinating model, and they were a country that were in dire straits to a large extent as well, and they had a no-nonsense approach. Their previous prime minister made enormous gains in that country, and they had the right focus points. They had a point of focus on education very strong, on skills, on technology, and they simply did not take any nonsense from the socialist trade unions that were pressuring the government. So the meritocracy theme, I think if we can move to that, I think there would be some real change. So that would be the best scenario, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I'll just tell you from a personal level, I was actually invited over to Singapore in 1993. This is pre-internet, because I had the first multimedia company in Australia which built interactive presentations which companies could put on their floppy disks and then send all over the world to promote their products, like little promotional brochures. So this was leading technology back then. And the
Absolutely.
Singapore government invited me across to come and give a demonstration of what I was doing. And I did a disc for the Singapore government on tourism in Singapore. And that's my experience with them. But fabulous, beautiful place, absolutely beautiful.
Yes. No, and interesting thought as well on the best model to approach a situation like we have in the country is the Japanese model, the Japanese restoration. What they did is they modernized their country and their economy without going through, without being colonized in the sense that they give up their identity and their culture. So they were able to modernize their country without, in a way, letting leave of the values that country that stood for. And that's also an interesting model. If you look at African liberations in the continent, when the liberation movements, especially in the 1960s, took off, you saw those leaders of the liberation movement take over those levers of power and actually enforce harder the institutions that were already there. So the Japanese model and the Singaporean model is very interesting. And I think in South Africa, we need to not simply approach it by just taking a few models and just copy it here. We need to realize what the reality of the country is. The reality of the country is that we're not really a country which you can, in a way, compare with other countries. We are truly unique in the sense that we are so diverse in culture, so diverse in language, and that we need to work with those realities to ensure we end at the place where we've got a situation where those communities in South Africa have a larger say to matters that affect them. I don't think centralization or the central government is the best way to approach the reality. So for South Africa, how would the South African model look like? It will look like greater powers being afforded to communities in a range of affairs, in education and municipal affairs. But I think we need to have a discussion also on what would the South African model look like if we had our free choice to say, this is my wish list, this is what happen, and this will correspond with reality.
But wouldn't that take away from the power of the central government? I'm talking about the ANC and their cadres.
Yes, absolutely, it will. So we have a wishing list, so we can start there.
Yeah,
And
but
then,
I don't think they'd ever allow that, would they? Because they like ultimate power.
Absolutely, no, that's true. That's true. If we and it corresponds now with the theme that we are talking about tonight.
Yeah.
And that is that we need to, in a state, in the context of South Africa, where we have largely a failing state. I think it's fair to say it's a failing state that we have. You can see where there are de facto environments and situations created where the communities simply take up a larger space of matters that affect them. And you can do so in a range of matters. So I think what's going to happen is as more and more as the state becomes ineffective, naturally you will see communities taking those things over. We see that in the education environment. We saw that now in the riots in regards to safety, how effective and swift and quick communities came together and could form blockades. They were there at instances before the police were there. So the interesting situation in South Africa is, as I said, a factive situation growing, and ultimately that would be the space to move in. And that's a positive thing. It means that communities are taking ownership of matters that affect them most. And I think that is a realistic picture going forward. And as to the centralized powers of the state, they won't allow that, and they will cling on to anything as far as they can. But they can only cling so long, and they can only take so long time. And already we've seen movements on that front, and which is exciting, and which is also why we are positive about the country, but not positive about an ANC future. We do not want an ANC future, but if we can have a future which we can build ourselves, and it's already starting to happen, we would like to see that happen more. So it's a valid point you make, and I truly hope that we can expedite our efforts that we make here.
Isn't the biggest danger that South Africa faces right now the complete fracturing of the ANC into a group that's aligned with the EFF on one side and another group that's aligned with the DA on the other side?
So we've got in our political spectrum a left-leaning political spectrum, most definitely. And at the moment, the ANC in the 2016 elections, 2019 elections, 19 elections mustered about 56% of the power. So they've got majority rule. But to really make big strides for their objectives, as articulated in their strategy and tactics documents, they would need to have 2/3 of the vote, of the support in Parliament. Now, the EFF and some other smaller parties will bring them quite quickly at that threshold. And it is indeed so. If there's a fracturing of the party, you will find the left clinging more and more together. And what happened recently in the country, we've seen actually a couple of years now that there's been a more of a fractured political situation. And I think the real threat indeed is that if that fracturing persists, it might end up in having the left being more and more united. And that could also spell some disdain for the country going forward. But what was interesting this week, and I don't know if you followed that, you had a very interesting discussion with Rob Hutchinson. I watched most of it on EWC.
Yeah.
And I think it was yesterday that the Minister Ronald Lomola, he drew a line in the sand to the EFF and said that they will not accept their amendments. The EFF wants a Zimbabwe-like situation. They are frank about that, what they proposed in the constitutional amendments. And the minister drew a line in the sand and said, we are for expropriation without compensation, but not for the EFF version. So that debate has stalemated at the moment. And what these fractures can lead to is at the moment uncertain, but that is truly a risk for the country. And we've got elections coming up this year, or at the latest next year, if the Constitutional Court application succeeds, and that will also bring about more power shifts. So it's continuously changing all the time, continuously changing. So we must monitor it, and we must form our own strategies. We cannot allow ourselves to be completely dependent upon ANC future, regardless of what's happening with the power shifts in the government and in the political spectrum. We need to organize ourselves.
Right. Now, don't you think that President Ramaphosa has misled the population, not just the white population, the Indian population, but the entire population about his agenda for South Africa? Because clearly he's tied up with the South African Communist Party and the National Democratic Revolution. And every time he talks about black economic transformation, you can just see the investors from overseas heading for the hills and getting the hell out of South Africa.
I think that he has, in a sense, not misled the country or the people. I think he has articulated very carefully what the positions of the ANC are, and he's been enough time on record regards to that. So I would say the people of the country and the white population and the other populations as well, and other cultures and communities have actually allowed themselves to be misled by what he said. They allowed themselves to think that the problem of this country is merely a leadership problem. So if you had Zuma, Ramaphosa is a better candidate, so let's go with him. So if he says we want to build the country, make it better, and we want to restructure the economy in such a way that it benefits all, and people believe that we've got a leadership problem, so they follow him. But they don't go further to realize that we've actually got a dispensation problem. We've actually got a policy problem. They only look at the individual and find himself to be a better person and better suited than Zuma, and then they disregard all the policies that the ANC has confirmed all day long. So I don't think he has been misled as much as people have allowed themselves to be misled. I think the ANC's position has been articulated. He most definitely gives a more softer version of the ANC. But only the other day, there was an interview with him where he said, we need to restructure the economy in a radical way. This cannot go on. I was at a talk, Scott, in 2019 where he spoke before the elections. And what was interesting what he said, he got a question, and the media was there as well. He got a question on how does he feel about the civil society having guns, being able to arm themselves. And he said he's not in favor of civil society having guns at all. He thinks they should be disarmed. He said that. They should be disarmed, but it's too soon to do that now. He's for a model, in favor of a model. I can't remember which country he cited. He cited a country where only the military are allowed to carry weapons. And he said, we must de-weaponize ourselves. We must disarm ourselves. The military must have the weapons, but it's too soon to talk about that now. That must come. That's in 2019. He's been clear, and there were media sitting there in the same hall where I was, and I thought, that's the headline. That's the headline tomorrow. Never came. And so I think he's articulated himself well enough, and I think he's been treated carefully, but I don't think he has misled. I think people have allowed themselves to be misled.
Right. Well, I think that country you're talking about is Australia, because Australia disarmed its population about 20 years ago now, or over 20 years ago now. And the police in Australia don't carry guns. They carry stun guns and stuff like that, but not lethal force. The only group that actually have guns are the army in Australia. So it could well be Australia. But I have to say that the murders in Australia haven't gone down because they just use other ways to murder now, like knives and stuff like that. So I think in a place like South Africa, where there are so many illegal guns in the hands of criminals, it's absolutely crazy to even consider removing licenses on the basis of self-defense. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, imagine these riots of the last 3 weeks, if we weren't allowed to have any weapons, or we didn't have any weapons. How we would be so exposed to the criminal elements. The central government and the South African police force, they don't even have a proper record of all the weapons in the country, and their weapons are being stolen and they get lost. You do have corrupt officials in the police. I don't want to say that of all police. We've got hard-working police, definitely, who's doing their jobs. But on the whole, the SAPS is very weak on this. They can't enforce it. So imagine if we had in this country no weapons at all, how exposed we will be to the criminal elements. It's simply unworkable. But Scott, I'll raise you one. I'll say that even if that Amendment Act or that regulation gets passed that prohibits prohibits having a weapon for self-defense, I will say to you, it won't work. The people will simply not accept it. They will not adhere to that regulation. A good example in that is the e-toll fax. For your international viewers, this government, the Gauteng government specifically, introduced something called e-tolls, which is like a gantry across the road, and then automatically, if you go underneath it, you get a bill and you must go and pay it.
Yeah.
In principle, it's an effective way to maintain the roads and collect tolling for that. But because we've got a government as incompetent as this and as corrupt as this, people simply have not paid the e-toll, and it's gone to such an extent, this civil resistance, this passive civil resistance, that the government's now on the verge of scrapping the e-toll system in its entirety because people simply didn't take it. And I think it would be the same with weapons.
Right. Now, when we cross to Ramaphosa at 8:30, what I'm going to suggest, Werner, is that we stop talking on Skype, but after he's finished speaking, because that means you can concentrate and listen to him speaking, but then after he's finished speaking, I'll Skype you back and then we'll discuss what he had to say. Now,
perfect.
Now, just getting back to the police situation, I had a thought last night, and I just want to run this past you. And we know that some police stations are very, very good. And we also know some police stations are shocking in the way they run. You know, in the tourism industry, you've got a star rating system for hotels. Why doesn't Solidarity set up a star rating system for police stations?
In a way, we have already we have knowledge of the state of the police stations there.
But I mean, for public consumption.
I think we can. I think that's a good suggestion. The way in which we approach the differing police stations is you would automatically see where AfriForum community safety structures are much larger organized, and they consist of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of members only for one town or one place. Automatically, the people simply know that they've got an ineffective station. And then you've got structures where the members are not as much, 50 members, 80 members for a town, and that automatically also conveys the state of the police station. But I think it's a good suggestion to have a greater knowledge about which stations are more effective and how to reach them so that we can make use of the effective policing service that we have, that we pay for. And we've already started something similar in regards to municipalities. We do each year, AfriForum does what they call a blue drop report to rate all the differing 300 municipalities we have, how they rate on the quality and the cleanness and the healthiness of the water. So we know we've got that record as well. We can extend it to the police side as well, so that people are more informed about where there are more effective police stations. And the approach that we take is we organize very well, we organize very seriously, and we are quite focused upon the skills and expertise of our members, but we want good relations with the SAPS. We want good relations with other safety structures, so we try to establish that as well. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we must keep on trying to achieve that.
Right. Now, I see that according to the information I'm getting, Ramaphosa has delayed his speech till 9 p.m. now. So it won't be 8:30.
Nothing strange.
So on that particular score, let's get back to the subject we're going to be talking about, because it is related to policing and the lack of policing in South Africa. And that is the communities getting together. But let's start off with the riots in KwaZulu-Natal last month. Do we know who is responsible? And if so, why have there been so few arrests?
Thus far, it's not completely sure who was behind these riots. They've identified 12 people, they say, are behind this organization of this organized crime. and a few of them were in prison, a few of them were before the courts, but there's been no big arrest, no report confirming exactly what had happened, and there's talks now of a possible second wave of these riots. I'm not sure if it will occur, but there's talk of that. And so we don't have information on that. If you follow the reporting, you get some of those people involved that are being brought before the courts. But what we don't know is exactly how they did it. We don't know exactly what the plans were, and who are those that are involved. So the informations are still scarce, and our legal justice system, probably in other countries as well, the wheel turns very, very slowly. And the chances that we will get a clear picture on everything here I don't think will come soon. If you look at the Zondo Commission, it started in 2018, I believe, and that's just a commission to look at state capture. And it's been ongoing for 3 years now. More than R1 billion has gone into that commission. It's important work, but the wheel is turning very, very slowly. So I'm not too hopeful on that score, but I do hope that some progress will be made in the near future.
Right. Okay, now, when we look at back what happened on that day, or on that one particular day, where a community was under threat, and they set up the blockades and they did what they did. One of the things that was absolutely amazing to see is that the so-called race barrier that the fake mainstream media in South Africa keep on putting out there, like there's a huge race problem. I think they're the race problem, quite honestly, but that's my personal perspective. But getting back to the situation in KZN, it was fantastic to see blacks, Indians, whites, coloureds all working together as a group and speaking out against the looters and the rioters. What are your thoughts on that?
No, it was quite. Firstly, this was an event for this country. This was a moment in history, something which I think ushers in a new era, and that is why it's worthwhile to stand a bit still on this point. So my view on this is, firstly, if you look at the AfriForum safety structures, which I've mentioned earlier, they've got about 160 branches countrywide. They've got about 12,000 volunteers, and they've positioned themselves so that cooperation with other groups was quite very effective. And the reason for the importance, I think, of this, or the interesting thing rather, of this discussion about us reflecting on those times and the wonderful cooperation that we've received. I spoke this morning with the head of safety for AfriForum, and he said to me, after all of this, he left this inspired. He left this inspired on what is capable when different communities start working together. But what is interesting, if you look at those occurrences, President Ramaphosa spoke that evening, when one of the evenings that he spoke, and he attributed this cooperation between communities and said that all of them were committed to safeguard the constitutional democracy we have, to safeguard the national dream, the national project, to protect our constitution and the rule of law. And that is what brought people together. And the fact, Scott, is that that is not the case. That when your business or your home or your area where you live and work is threatened, you don't think, I want to protect this supreme constitution of ours. The reason why there was, and this is the first important point to make, the reason for the cooperation that you saw is simply because we've got shared and common interests, all of us. Safety is a shared and common interest. So when you had the occurrences of Pongola, the town in Mpumalanga, in Richards Bay, in Natal, when community members and farmers were there to close down that piece of town or that part of the city, they've done so more effectively than SAPS. They coordinated more sufficiently and effectively than they could have had, and it's because they had a shared interest. There wasn't this a centralized dictate that have given orders or guidelines. We have people working on this shared interest that they have, and they have actually supplemented one another. Certain members of the community came which had no idea of safety, but they were there to report and assist. And no one said you must have this standard of cooperation, and your safety structure must have this racial composition, which is the ANC is quite fond of. We simply said, what is it that we could bring, and it flowed from there. So we've got a few lessons, and I quickly want to refer to some of the lessons I think that we can take from that, because I think it goes broader than simply a community working together with another community. It says much, much, much more. So we've spoken about earlier about the central issue, I think, which is in this country, and this confirms it, is that we've got a dispensation issue. Dispensation issue meaning a central authority that must hamper all the power that they can, and then decide for the community and in other spheres as well what is best for them and what is in their interest. This shows us a decentralized federal system is much more effective, and this thought is gaining traction. The debate on the Western Cape autonomy is also a very interesting one. And people are starting to see that maybe we should take more power into our own hands. So the first lesson, I think, from that is to realize that it wasn't a love for the Constitution or a constitutional democracy. It was simply a shared interest, a common interest. And that is the glue that brought us together. That is the glue that stated, or implicitly stated at least, that we have different ways of doing ourselves. We have got different ways of having our expertise and skills, and how we keep each other safe. But we can all make a difference in that. Stemming from the previous point, I think another interesting thing is the fact that they have been more successful and more effective, which we've mentioned already. And this principle can be applied outside of the community as well, outside of the community safety sphere as well. We've seen with this rights and this organization on the safety side that it is possible for communities to effect a greater change to their immediate lives, and we can extend this to some other parts as well. I don't know if you followed in the local government matters. There's a municipality in Koster, and the residents were unable to get water, and then the private sector came along, and they were able to take over through a court order the water services to that town. And water was restored. The dispute in the court is still going on, but it's amazing what you can do when you realize that you can simply take ownership on more and more matters. Schools organizing. Schools are becoming more and more effective offline, apart from the formal government structure. They have effectively, through this COVID period as well, started to organize different systems of education that makes them less dependent upon a central state. I think this lessons that we can draw from this goes much further than safety. I think this is a clearer sign that a movement needs to begin from the ground up and see what we can do together, respecting each other's different viewpoints, respecting each other's backgrounds, but looking for that which we have in common and shared, and build on that. I think you would know the quote of President Paul Kruger, where he said that neem uit die verlede wat goed en edel is en bou daarop. Take from the past which is good and noble and build from that.
Yeah.
And I think that is the inspirational message of community working, and I think those lessons, I hope, will serve us well going forward in this country.
Right. Now, there is a bit of feedback coming through when I talk to you, Werner. Have you got my audio on loud? Can you turn it down a little bit? See if we can just remove that.
Let me do so. All right. It's a bit softer.
Okay. Let's see how that goes. That's much better. All right. Now, you touched on secession in the Western Cape. I've spoken to all the leaders of these secessionist groups. I've spoken to Hein Marx. I've spoken to Des Palm. I've spoken to the fellow from the Cape Party. I've had Peter Hammond, who is actually involved in the Cape independence movement, on my show several times. And there's a common belief that the Western Cape should secede from the rest of South Africa. I mean, and I think a lot of people in the Western Cape would agree with what I'm saying right now. What is stopping that happening when you consider that the South African Police Service and the Army is such a complete joke?
The secession debate is a very interesting debate, and AfriForum also now is involved in that campaign for greater autonomy within the Western Cape. Before I go to that, what is stopping it? What was interesting to me, the discussion on Western Cape secession is actually, I won't say an old discussion, but it's definitely not a new discussion. It gained traction and it gained impetus only last year, and it was to me quite fascinating to see what gave it independence, gave it more thrust. There was a poll that was conducted by a new organization, and I think you would be aware of those. I think it's the Western Cape Independent Group. It's something to that effect, but they're a brand new group, and the simple thing that they've did. They ran a scientific poll, so they contracted a polling company, and they asked questions about secession and also a larger autonomy for the Western Cape. The results came back, and more than 66% of them wanted more autonomy for the Western Cape, and that they would support the idea of having a referendum in the Western Cape for that purposes. And when that poll came out in last year, phenomenal how the debate just took off and gained traction. Because then you realized, I spoke of common interests and shared beliefs and common shared values and interests. All of a sudden, there's a sizable portion of the Western Cape that says, maybe we should consider this. So what's hampering it? I think the approach thus far was that you will need to follow a legal process. And the strategy, as I read it from the different groupings, would be to pressure the Democratic Alliance government in the Western Cape to call a referendum and have a vote on secession. If not secession, the wording they will have to formulate, but greater spheres of autonomy for the Western Cape. But you would need a referendum for the legal route to be followed. Secession by way of a de facto setting or something to that effect, I think would be more difficult. Although we've got provincial governments, the constraints, or rather the interworkings of the provincial and national governments, are much more complex. There's interesting, the Cape Party leader, his surname is Miller. It's Mr. Miller. I've met him as well.
Yeah, Jack Miller.
Yes, Jack. Yes, I've met Jack as well. He's got a real interesting presentation on the different budgets between the provincial budget of the Western Cape and the national. But I think that's a valid argument. But it remains quite intertwined at the moment to take it in a way that is not through a legal process which would lead to a referendum. So it's a strategy to place political pressure on the DA government, as I see it, in order to call a referendum and also to have them consider this. And if they don't, there's other parties now, political parties as well. The Freedom Front also called for that referendum, the Cape Party with Jack, as you know, and other movements as well. And they would try to see if they can sway it in the political ballot box to see if they can give more thrust to that. So the legal route would be a referendum. But yeah, I would like to hear your thoughts on that, Scott. What do you think what do you think can happen? Maybe another option of how they could accelerate this call for a more speedy up recession process.
Right. Well, first off, I should say that both Cape Exit and Cape Party have their YouTube channels copied into our contributing channels on lovinglivetv.com.
Wonderful.
That's our new platform which we're transitioning to, and what we do is we back up all the videos of the contributing channels. So if YouTube take down one of those channels, it doesn't matter because we've got them in our own cloud and they continue to be shown. It's a free service we provide to people who we think are doing the right thing for South Africa. But getting back to your point about what is stopping, I believe what is stopping the Western Cape actually seceding from the rest of South Africa, I think in a word, it's called the Democratic Alliance. Because they are so tied up with the ANC that they are clearly looking for a national solution. And as long as the DA head up the Western Cape, I'm talking about the guy who heads up that province, you're not going to have any movement on the referendum. I think that's the problem. The DA have got to be kicked out, and
Yep.
something like the Cape Party have got to have the balance of power and make it a condition of forming a coalition that they have a referendum. I think that's the only way it's going to happen.
Yep. I agree with that. I think that the Democratic Alliance is indeed. Alan Winde, the Premier of Western Cape, is on record to say he's against the secession of the Western Cape, and they are in a difficult position. But I hope that they would see that there's a growing swell of people that wants to call for this, and it makes a lot of sense. At AfriForum and the Solidarity Movement, we support that move for greater autonomy and secession of the Western Cape, not because it's the Western Cape, but we think the principle is a sound principle. We believe that principle should be applied elsewhere as well. And if it can gain traction in the Western Cape, we will throw our weight behind that, and we will support that. So it is the DA that is throwing the brakes on this one, but I don't think it's a question that they would be able to ignore for much longer. So it'd be interesting to see how this election is going to play out on that question as well.
Right, because if the Cape Party do hold the balance of power, they've said quite openly that they will form a coalition, but on the basis that they have a referendum, and that'll be their primary interest, which I think is fantastic. So if I was in the Western Cape and a voter, I'd be voting for Cape Party. But talking about secession, there's another big elephant in the room here, and it's again coming back to KwaZulu-Natal. You've got that huge land trust, which is owned by the King of the Zulus. Now, clearly, that's a perfect area to secede from South Africa if the Zulus say we've had enough of this ANC crap.
Yes, it's the Ngoyama Trust. The trust was established after 1994, and it's actually a law. It's called the Ngoyama Trust Act, and that act provides a whole lot of autonomy to the Natal province, and the Zulu nation would be able quite effectively, I would say more effectively than in the Western Cape, to declare a succession in that regard. And there's the new Zulu King. I haven't heard him make many statements. He's made a few statements since he's been crowned, the Zulu King, the King of the Zulus. I might just say on AfriForum side, we've got great relations with the Zulus. We've got great relations with the Zulu monarchy and those who are a part of that, and we try to do that, and we try to create a better understanding and see where we can foster relationships wherever possible, and they would do so effectively. And I think that the province, unfortunately, is I don't think the province necessarily is ready to be able to form a secession of that nation and be successful. But as I think what the Zulus will need to push them in that direction to consider it is if the ANC starts to say that we need to disband the Ngoyama Trust, which there are strong voices on the ANC side to do so, and have it formally unified with the Republic. And so I think if the ANC is pushing in that direction, you would find much more swift action on the side of the Zulus in relation to that question. So I think that will be the necessary push for them to consider that. And that's also not off the table. That is still in place. You've got the Western Cape side, you've got the side of the Zulus, and then what's interesting to me is if you look at the many traditional authorities we have in this country, and I respect the notion of a community that have a larger say on matters that affect them. And you get these traditional authorities, which in many instances, the way they practice it, you and I would probably differ with a lot of it on that way. But I think the principle here is to create a space, freedom, so that those that can govern themselves can do so. About more than 20 million South Africans are in some other way connected to a traditional authority. That's a whole lot. That's a whole lot. Imagine if the traditional authorities in this country, and there's a range of them, starting to break away from the formal government structures, to say that we must consider forming our own a body apart from that which the state has provided us, and discuss how we're going forward. It's more than 20 million people under those traditional authorities. They will have a large say. So the secession discussion is, I think, at least important enough, given the considerations of the Western Cape, the Nkuyama Trust, and the many, many traditional authorities that still is. And people respect them. People in this country who are part of those structures respect their authority, they respect their customs, and they view that as their culture that they need to and must preserve. And on principle, we will support them having a larger say on their affairs as well. So interesting movements on that score as well, Scott.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I find a bit disturbing about the Zulu people as a group is you've got the traditional Zulus who live up in northern Natal. They're very peace-loving. They just do their traditional stuff. And then you've got the activists, who are the ones who I think were very involved with Jacob Zuma and what happened in KwaZulu-Natal. So it's almost like you've got, within the Zulu nation, you've got two forces fighting against each other. The ones who want a good and stable family life, and those who are just out there to enrich themselves. How does one resolve that?
That's such a difficult thing. I mean, you've got the ANC Zulu power structure in the Natal. And what was interesting is that after Jacob Zuma has been arrested and the looting that had followed and the purported intention to free Zuma, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, on behalf of the Zulu nation, on behalf of the monarchy, he's a spokesperson for them. He denounced it completely, denounced that movement to say that we need to mobilize along ethnic lines for Zuma and elsewhere. He denounced it completely. But there's always been this tension. You remember in the early 90s with the IFP and the ANC, that massacre that occurred. And it was a fight largely among Zulus. And so that element has been there. And also, you've got the splintering of the National Freedom Party, which split it from the Independent Inkatha Freedom Party, and so in a way, it's a mess. And the KwaZulu-Natal province is also known for the political assassinations, especially on local council level. So you've got so many things interplaying, and I think the more resolve to that, I believe, and I hope, to be honest, is that the Zulu King, in a way, can display a leadership in his term now that, in a way, calms the situation. We will need the ANC in their internal struggles and their various factions or groupings or whatever you want to call it. They will be to need a new settled power structure in relation to the top six and elsewhere. And then you will see a form of peace establishing there. But I don't think, to be honest, it will be sustainable. There will also always be some sort of tension. And so the resolvement of this, I think, must come from the Zulu King first. And hopefully he can unite the people. And you would need a stable political situation. And I think that will be the conditions for sort of a peaceful resolve of this. But it's a very important, yes, but it's a difficult issue, this one.
Right. Now, just for those who've joined us, we've got about 400 people watching across the two platforms at the moment. We will be crossing live to the live cabinet shuffle or reshuffle by Ramaphosa in less than 10 minutes' time, but it's already been postponed by half an hour. It's supposed to be at 8:30, but it's now scheduled for 9 p.m. And then after we've had the speech by Ramaphosa, we will be getting Werner back on again to discuss what was said during the cabinet reshuffle, to get his views on that whole thing. So you're getting a huge bonus in this live stream. It's fantastic to have Werner with us tonight at this time. Now, okay, so we've talked basically about the secession aspect. We've then got communities like Orania, which are clearly like an Afrikaans outpost in the middle of the Northern Cape. or not in the middle, right in the northern edge of the Northern Cape. But what do you think about those as a secondary way of communities actually looking after their own interests?
We strongly support Orania. Orania is at the tip of the Northern Cape province, but almost smack in the middle of the country. And it's in a part of the country where the demographics of the country and the population in that area is very scarce. There's not a lot of people in the Northern Cape, and they have not. And it's in through history of this country as well. The Northern Cape, that part of Northern Cape was always scarcely populated, not a large population. Orania is a great way of community organizing to have a larger say on their affairs that affect them directly. Orania is a town, as you said, in the Northern Cape. It's about 160 km from Kimberley, about 60 kilometers from Hopetown, and it's simply a community which said that they want to govern their own affairs. They want to have a space where your language and your culture is preserved by yourself. Orania's got a principle which they follow right through, which is also for do-it-yourself. If you go through Orania, you will see that the residents there, they build their own houses, they clean their own streets. Orania's got a very interesting position on labor. One of the things in the past, and especially the apartheid and colonial era, if we go there was most definitely skewed labor practices, and that meant that you actually become, when you have practices that are unjust, and that was the case during those times, you will have actually a situation where you are becoming a slave of the labor that you employ. That sort of, if you enslave, in inverted commas, you will become that slave of that labor that you employed. So in order to be free, you will need to be able to work your own land, by way of speaking. Orania is an interesting town of a community. They started in the early 1990s with a few families going there, and it was only a few asbestos houses that were there. It was built in the 1960s. The Van der Kloof Dam is about 20 km or so out of there, and that town was just built for the building of the dam. It never had the intention of becoming a town on its own. And then people started moving there, and they have 2 schools there. They've got churches there. They've got a hotel there, but it's fashioned close to a river, so you get this nature feel in the hotel. You've got businesses there. You've got a lawyer there. There's a doctor there. There is the Orania Movements Offices, obviously, is there. And it's a community that want to see what you can do when you are completely to your own devices. And I think if we talk about freedom, in this sense, is you will be completely free or experience a large sense of freedom when you can govern your own affairs. And I think that is the modest aim of Orania, for a community to be self-sufficient and grow and be able to school their own children, to be able to create their own safety structures, to be able to create their own businesses. And that corresponds much more with the reality in South Africa, rather than this centralized or one theme position to say that we must all have a single language, we must all have a single culture, single practices. So Orania is doing well. They've got about 1,800 people living there at the moment, and they are steadily growing. And I hope it's a positive thing that Orania tries to do. They reach out to other communities close by. They assist with organizing community organization in other parts of the town, especially on the traditional authority side. They've got good relations. It's an entirely different model than you would find in the rest of South Africa, which started from the top and then it trickles down. Orania is truly a movement of people from the bottom looking for opportunities to build something new. It's difficult. It's hard work to do so, but they've made some tremendous progress. So I think Orania is a very interesting a set of facts, and they are growing surely but steadily, and it can be an example for the rest of the country as well.
Well, you've got some amazing people in the community at Orania. I've actually spoken to quite a few of them here on live streams, and they have a common vision. They work together. They know where they're going. They know what they want to achieve, and the thing that they really feel so blessed about is their ability to enjoy their own culture. And I think that is really something that is completely lost to so many people, is that cultures have their different beliefs, their different ways of doing things. And, sometimes it's like mixing oil and water. They don't work. You can't mix some cultures. It just doesn't work. And when the R word is thrown out because this happens or that happens, when it's completely irrelevant, that's what I think is one of the sins of the mainstream media. And I find it very disturbing, for example, that Anchor, which apparently is owned by Johan Rupert, they keep on going out to Orania and putting on the spin that it's a racist town. What are your thoughts about the role in the mainstream media when it comes to the way they perceive or present a town like Orania?
Again, a very interesting occurrence on that. If you and I had this discussion 10 years ago, the theme of the discussion on Orania would be, this is a almost a persona non grata town. It is a town full of racists, and a town just set out to exploit black people and trying to create a new apartheid state and all of that. That was a misperceptions of Orania 10 years ago. It still is today, but 10 years ago it was quite brutal. And especially if you know that in the beginning of the 90s, Professor Karel Boshoff, which started Orania.
I've spoken to Karel, yeah.
It's
lovely man.
Phenomenal how he can word the existence of Orania much better than I can. He's been there for more than 30 years. But they knew from the start what they are busy with. There were no nefarious intentions, nothing out of the sort. It's simply preserving a culture and being able to govern yourself in a friendly manner in cooperation with others as well. And 10 years ago, it was simply a subject you would not touch on. If you would go to the average person here who now knows about Orania at least, the impression has changed, Scott. The impression has changed.
Good.
And a large reason why that impression has changed is because of the biased and one-sided reporting that has happened in Orania since this 10 years. Because people have looked at Orania and say, these people build their own things. They build their own houses. They build their own schools. They are friendly people. They are not these beasts or monsters that are being portrayed. So people began to see that there was inaccurate reporting. Last year, ENCA, every election cycle, people come, the media come, and many instances you get negative reporting. We had positive reporting in Orania as well in the past. Last year it was, I believe, ENCA, which had to apologize because of skewed reporting. Yes. They portrayed Orania in a bad light, they reported in a factual, incorrect way, and they had to apologize to Orania, and that was news as well. So people are starting to see that how Orania is portrayed is not the reality how it is. It is a wonderful people, and I think that tide is turning as well. 10 years ago, people have not even mentioned it. Today, people are considering Orania, at least to say, I might not move there, but I support the cause. I want to join the Orania movement as a member and contribute to their success of conveying what is happening in Orania to attract more people and do what a town must do. We want to grow. We want to have local economic growth. We want to be a town where you can where businesses prosper and people are safe. And that is a sort of ideals, and I think that is normal. In this country, in South Africa, with the ANC rule, unfortunately, we've come to a stage where abnormal is being normalized. Being to walk out and not being able to go into the inner cities or be at certain places That's not normal. That is abnormal. It is abnormal if you are Afrikaans or Zulu and you are forced to have education in English. It's abnormal if you can't be safe where you are. It's abnormal if you cannot express yourself in a private setting how you would want to in relation to free speech and free writing. All of that is abnormal, but Urania is actually the most normal thing you would find if you go there. You would say, this is normal. Children playing 7 and 8 o'clock in the night in the streets, that should be normal. It shouldn't be abnormal. That's how it needs to be. So Urania is actually, in a way, the most normal thing you would find in South Africa.
Right. Now, just on the subject of Urania, on our lovinglifetv.com forum, we actually have a page dedicated to Urania. And on there, we have links to all their videos, which are from Urania, and you can see the perspective is so different to that presented by media like Enka. Now, just addressing people watching, guys, we will cross live to Ramaphosa as soon as he appears. He still hasn't appeared. It's 3 minutes past 9 p.m. now. But what will happen is that I will break the conversation with Werner while Ramaphosa is talking, but after his speech we'll get Werner back on again to give his comments and thoughts on what has actually happened in the cabinet reshuffle. So that'll happen after Ramaphosa's speech. All right, now we're kind of just waiting for the ball to drop at the moment, so it's hard to raise another question because I know what's going to happen. As soon as I do it, Ramaphosa is going to come on, and then I'm going to have to say, I'll see you after he's been on. But we've touched on this whole thing with the communities in South Africa. Now, we had that homeland era where you had these homelands which were set up by Verwoerd, like, for example, the Transkei, the Ciskei, and so on. And, of course, the rest of the world were in shock horror and said, this is racist, you can't do this, and aren't we talking about here, when we talk about communities, a similar type of model happening again?
A very good question. I don't think so at all. I think if we look at that era, what the intention of apartheid and the intention was for Verwoerd was to actually give expression to set realities in the country. That didn't work, but the great thing, or not the great, the wrong thing that has happened there is, and that's also on the Afrikaner side, I would say, is that we were a community of Afrikaners through our history. If you could go through the history of how the Transvaal state and the Orange Free State came about, and our struggle, or our strive rather, to be free and to govern ourselves, we were a community of Afrikaners. Apartheid, eventually, as apartheid grew larger, we actually gave up, by manner of speaking, our identity as a Afrikaner cultural community, and we, I say now we, the National Party, at much more the identity of a state identity, which was a state that was also overcroaching, which was a state that was also too large and wanted to exercise control on too many things. So that was, I think, one of the reasons why everything veered off course. But what you say, to the point that of homelands, I would view that specific occurrence within the framework of a large centralized state identity, and I think that's a large reason why it doesn't work. But it doesn't mean that ground level reality, South African in a realistic perspective, that doesn't correspond with what you've said there. I think that we remain, after all of these years, we remain still a diverse nation. After all of these years, we still have different communities with different values and different beliefs. If you want to clamp them together in a single state, you won't be able to get that common ground. The best way to do it is to acknowledge differences in a friendly way and actually create room and space for those differences to coexist and to allow for different models and beliefs. I mentioned the Zulu and other traditional authorities there. And I've mentioned that although we do not have many things we would not personally agree with, I can appreciate a culture and a practice that differs from mine. I can appreciate that there's a difference, and I think it would be wrong to say that your way of doing things should correspond on the way that I view things. And in that sense, that diversity would be much better served when there's acknowledgement of that. And I think that is, if you on Verwoerd, probably that is what he wanted to achieve, to understand that these differences that there are, to make room for it. And apartheid didn't work, and there was gross.
Sorry, guys, we seem to have just got a little freeze there.
That was taken up by the National Party, which was wrong, but it doesn't mean giving expression to differences and acknowledging differences that exist and allow it to happen in the public setting. I agree with you completely there.
Right. Okay, well, we're still waiting for Ramaphosa. He's now nearly 10 minutes late nearly 40 minutes late, I should say, but I guess there's been some more reshuffling taking place. Maybe Bekesela will be the Minister of Finance.
I think the fact, if he's late, and I think your even the international audience that's also listening in to this, Scott, you and I know that during this Corona command council, whatever we had for
the NEC
time, he was completely late, especially in the beginning, and sometimes it was worth an hour or two he was late.
Yeah.
It shows you that to do a thing that's actually his prerogative, you first have to consult with a political party. Maybe while we wait for them, let's just maybe mention this about the party political system in South Africa.
Please do.
The system we have is that of a representative government, and we've got a party political system. And the way it is structured is that the ANC would want to have you believe that you can completely separate the government from the ruling party. Now, every 5 years, the ANC has their national conference. And at that national conference, they decide on the policies and the procedures of how this country must run. And even going further than that, they elect a powerful group of 6 cadres who are part of that body. And the 6 cadres are ineffectively, I would say, the de facto cabinet of the country. So the resolutions of the ANC Congress that you get, they become the mandate and the instruction to government. So when we have these cabinet reshufflings and we have policy positions of government and all of that, you will hear the word consultation constantly. They will need to consult with the political leaders. So the first thing that Ramaphosa must do, he cannot act simply as president and say, this is a bad guy, I'm throwing him out. This person on a merit levels better, I'm bringing him in. He has to run it through his own inner circle in the ANC first. So what that tells you is if there's a list of priority of considerations for Cyril Ramaphosa, it is firstly the party. The party comes first always, and second the country. If you cannot get something past the party, it won't feature in government or in cabinet. And that is the reason when we have these delays, it's a sign that the deliberations between the ANC structures have not yet come to an agreement on consensus on who those candidates will be. So Ramaphosa, in terms of his presidency, he can simply say, I'm going to do this, it's my prerogative. But he has to run it through the top 6. He has to run it through other structures as well. He has to consult with Labour. He wants to consult with all of those structures outside of government. So our system, Scott, is, as you would know, is one where the party political system and the government is completely intertwined. That's why you would have in state-owned enterprises cadres deployed to many of those positions. And if you look at Eskom, if you look at the railways, if you look at all of these as
we're just going live. Here we go.
Excellent. All right.
Firstly, we are working to accelerate our vaccination program to overcome
guys,
the
here we go.
COVID-19 pandemic. Secondly, we are working to ensure that there is peace and stability in our country in the wake of the recent outbreak of violence and destruction in parts of the country. And thirdly, we are mobilizing all available resources and capabilities to rebuild our economy and provide relief to the most vulnerable. I'm therefore making changes to the National Executive to improve the capacity of government so that it is able to effectively undertake these tasks. At the same time, there are a number of vacancies that need to be filled. These vacancies created by the tragic passing of Minister Jackson Mthembu and Deputy Minister Velile Hlongwa, and the appointment of former Minister Pax Tau as MEC in Gauteng. A further vacancy has arisen following the request I have received from Minister Zwelini Mkhize to allow him to step down as the Minister of Health in order to bring certainty and stability to the health portfolio. I'm grateful to Minister Mkhize for his service to our country, and particularly for the outstanding leadership he has provided in the face of the worst pandemic in over a century in our country. I have also accepted a long-standing request by Minister Tito Mboweni to be excused from his position as Minister of Finance. Minister Mboweni took up this position following the sudden departure of former Minister Nhlanhla Nene in October 2018. Since then, he has effectively and ably steered National Treasury through extremely difficult economic times, providing leadership and instilling confidence. I'm grateful to Minister Mboweni for responding to the call I made to him to serve our nation at its time of great need. I had prevailed on him to stay on, even as he wanted to leave earlier. And today, I've acceded to his request to leave. And we wish him well in his endeavors, and I'm sure that he will continue to excel and also be available for certain tasks that he may be given from time to serve our people. We're making certain changes to the configuration of government departments and ministries. The first of these is to separate the Ministry of Human Settlements from the Ministry of Water and Sanitation. At the beginning of this administration, we had brought these two portfolios together on the understanding that the provision of water is closely tied to the development of human settlements. However, the reality is that water is a far broader issue, impacting not only on human settlements, but also on agriculture, industry, mining, and environmental management. Water is our country's most critical natural resource. Water security is fundamental to the lives and health of our people, to the stability of our society, and to the growth and sustainability of our economy. We've therefore decided that water and sanitation should be a separate ministry, which will enable a dedicated focus on ensuring that all South Africans have access to a secure and sustainable supply of this precious resource. The second change we are making is to do away with the Ministry of State Security and place political responsibility for the state security agency in the presidency. And this is also done by a number of other governments around the world, This is to ensure that the country's domestic and foreign intelligence services more effectively enable the President to exercise his responsibility to safeguard the security and integrity of the nation. With respect to ministers, I am making the following new appointments. In the Presidency, we'll be appointing Mr. Mondling Gugubele, Communications and Digital Technologies, Ms. Kumbuzo Nchaveni, Defense and Military Veterans, Ms. Thandi Modise, Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, Health, Mr. Joe Pahla, Human Settlements, Ms. Mamuluku Kubai, Public Service and Administration, Ms. Ayanda Dlodlo, Small Business and Development, Minister Stella Ndabeni Abrahams, Tourism, Ms. Lindiwe Sisulu, Water and Sanitation, Mr. Senzo Mkhulu. Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngakula will be deployed to a new position, and we'd like to thank her for her service to the nation and dedication for her responsibilities. With respect to deputy ministers, I'm making the following appointments. In the Presidency, we'll have Ms. Pinky Kekana, who will come in as the second deputy minister. In Agriculture, Rural Development and Land Reform, Ms. Zoleka Kapa. In Communications and Digital Technologies, Mr. Phili Mapulane. Mboweni, to be excused, but also on agriculture, industry, mining, and environmental management. Water is our country's most critical natural resource. Water security is fundamental to the lives and health of our people, to the stability of our society, and to the growth and sustainability of our economy. We've therefore decided that water and sanitation should be a separate ministry, which will enable a dedicated focus on ensuring that all South Africans have access to a secure and sustainable supply of this precious resource. The second change we are making is to do away with the Ministry of State Security and place political responsibility for the state security agency in the Presidency. And this is also done by a number of other governments around the world. This is to ensure that the country's domestic and foreign intelligence services, Deputy Minister Mahlobo, more effectively enable the President to exercise his responsibility to safeguard the security and integrity of the nation. With respect to ministers, I am making the following new appointments. In the Presidency, we'll be appointing Mr. Mondling Gugubele, Communications and Digital Technologies, Ms. Kumbuzo Nchaveni, Defense and Military Veterans, Ms. Thandi Modise, Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, Health, Mr. Joe Pahla, Human Settlements, Ms. Mamuluku Kubai, Public Service and Administration, Ms. Ayanda Dlodlo. Small Business and Development, Minister Stella Ndabeni Abrahams. Tourism, Ms. Lindiwe Sisulu. Water and Sanitation, Mr. Senzo Mkhulu. Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa Nqakula will be deployed to a new position, and we'd like to thank her for her service to the nation and dedication for her responsibilities. With respect to deputy ministers, I'm making the following appointments. In the presidency, we'll have Ms. Pinky Kekana, who will come in as the second deputy minister. In Agriculture, Rural Development and Land Reform, Ms. Zoleka Kapa. In Communications and Digital Technologies, Mr. Phili Mapulane. Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Ms. Tembing Kadimeng. Health, Dr. Sibongiseni Dlomo. Mineral Resources and Energy, Dr. Nobuhle Nkabane. Public Service and Administration, Dr. Chana Pilane Majake. Small Business Development, Mr. Dumo Dlamini. Transport, Ms. Sindisiwe Chikunga. Water and Sanitation, Ms. Dikeledi Magazi, who will also be working there with Deputy Minister Mahlobo. Mr. Zizi Kodwa is appointed as Deputy Minister in the Presidency responsible for state security. My fellow South Africans, 3 weeks have passed since the country experienced an orchestrated campaign of public violence, destruction, and sabotage. I wish to once again commend the brave actions of our security forces on the ground, who were faced with a difficult situation and exercised commendable restraint to prevent any loss of life or further escalation. While calm has restored to the affected areas and our law enforcement agencies are working hard to bring those responsible to justice, we have acknowledged that our security services were found wanting in several respects. As part of the critical measures we are undertaking to strengthen our security services and to prevent a recurrence of these events, I'm appointing an expert panel to lead a thorough and critical review of our preparedness and the shortcomings in our response. Members of the panel are Professor Sandy Africa, who will chair this panel, Advocate Mujanku Gumbi, and Mr. Sulumko Sokupa. The panel will examine all aspects of our security response and will make recommendations on strengthening our capabilities. To improve support to the President and the National Security Council in the strategic management of the country's security, I'm appointing Dr. Sidney Mufamadi as National Security Advisor. This position has been vacant since Mr. Charles Nqakula stepped down earlier this year. I did write to him and thanked him for his service. I wish to express my deep appreciation to all outgoing ministers and deputy ministers for their service to government and to the people of South Africa. The task of rebuilding our economy And our society requires urgent action and focus. It requires cooperation amongst all sectors of society and the active involvement of all South Africans. As this administration, as this collective, we are unwavering in our determination to build a capable state, one which is ably led and which effectively serves the needs of the people of our country. I thank you.
All right, guys, there you had it. Ramaphosa's address to the nation about the changes in his cabinet. Now, I'm going to get Werner back on to give his perspectives because he's in a far better position than I am. Here we go. Hi, Werner.
Hello, Scott.
Welcome back to Fox News Primetime. We've obtained new
where's
images
that
out
coming
of
from?
Chicago from over the weekend.
Can you hear
Please
me?
be advised,
Yeah, I can,
some
but I've
may
got
find
Fox
what we're
News
about to show
Primetime
you
somehow.
graphic.
Let me just see what's happening
Thousands of
here.
young
Give me a
people
second.
gathered for a 3-day
Sure.
music festival without masks.
I've got a
Look at
problem
them.
here.
Didn't they hear
Houston,
Joe
we
Biden's
have a
dire warning
problem.
about a second dark winter?
I
Many
think
of
it might
those
be
who
this
claim
one.
to follow the
No, it's not
science
that one.
became very upset at this site.
Okay,
They
let
don't
me
like
just
to
have a
see
look
people
down
outside
here.
having fun. They want you to believe these
You
concert
gotta
goers
love the
are in
internet,
grave
haven't
danger.
you?
And that might be true.
Absolutely.
They are in Chicago, after all.
Okay,
Last month, the
I'm
city
just
saw
gonna shut
105
these
murders,
down.
3 times the amount of COVID deaths.
Okay,
In
sorry,
Washington,
sorry
D.C.,
about
that.
murders also
I
surpassed
can't see
COVID
your
deaths by a
camera
near
if-
3-to-1
Oh, no,
ratio
that's fine.
in
My,
July.
my camera's been
Despite these
stolen
numbers,
by...
the media and elected officials
let me
are
just see, it
seemingly
must be
still
in
trying
here.
to figure out how to flatten the curve instead of addressing
Okay,
the
just-
violent
no,
crime
it's not in
pandemic
there.
plaguing inner cities. Tim Poole hosts the Timcast IRL
Sorry, I
podcast,
just
and he
don't know
joins
where
me
this
now.
is
Tim,
coming
it's
from.
good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ben.
You know, this
is
level
weird.
of hypocrisy that we see
It's not coming from your
the
computer, is
leaders
it?
of America's inner cities.
You haven't got
It-
Fox
it's
no, no.
audacious in a way that I really haven't.
Everything
it's
seems
like
fine on
nothing
my
I've seen
side.
before.
Okay.
It's as if they imagine
just
that the
going
American
through
people are just too stupid to pay any
systematically here.
attention
And
to the level of
until I
hypocrisy
sort
and the
this
level
out,
of
we're not
government's
gonna have a-
failure to address the
belt to
problems
really,
that are
talk
clearly impacting our
sensibly.
communities. What do you think's going on here?
This is the first time
I-
this has ever happened. It's
I
crazy.
honestly have no idea. You know, having grown
Look,
up in
I'm just gonna
Chicago,
shut everything
I've
down.
personally witnessed the gun violence.
Except
I'm
for us.
wondering why, after my entire life, they've not been able to solve
Okay.
it. They seem to just keep doubling down. But when it comes to the COVID restrictions, our leaders, the mayors, the governors, we see them flaunting the rules. They don't wear masks. They tell everyone else
Okay.
to. The funniest thing about Chicago is
Now,
they're warning us that the
I've got
Delta
nothing
variant is on the
left on
rise.
the web.
We gotta bunker down and make sure we slow the spread.
This is crazy.
But only after we can make tens of millions from our big rock concerts. At the same
absolutely
time,
crazy.
they come out and tell us that all of the Black Lives Matter protests weren't spreading COVID, and all the right-wing lockdown protests were. I can't believe people fall for these narratives, and it kind of breaks my heart to see.
Okay,
Well,
I'm going to
it
shut
really is
down
frustrating
the
on a number of
entire...
different levels, but
Okay, I've killed it. I don't know where it was coming from, but I've got rid of it. That's the main thing. All right, let's get back to the discussion that we had with Ramaphosa there. Tell us what the most startling things were for you in the moves that he's made.
Well, Scott, it was certainly a mouthful. It was quite a reshuffle. And I think that explains also the length of time it took for him to speak. He had to start at 8:30, and we only spoke after 9. So there's a lot of discussion that had to take place on his side. Many changes. So I think if we look at the security cluster, that move was very interesting. To shift the security cluster, essentially the Ministry of Intelligence, State Security, is now underneath the presidency. Some key changes have been made, which we can unpack. But most certainly, the most notable change was that of the Ministry of Finance. Tito Mboweni is someone who is a respectable person, not only within the ANC circles, although he's got quite some tensions with the SACP and the labour movements. But broadly in South Africa, he's viewed as a centrist person. He was a previous governor of the Reserve Bank. And his record thus far as Minister of Finance wasn't bad, taking into account the ANC standards and the ANC environment that he comes from. But it tells you that a centrist position within the ANC is something which is simply untenable. Is something which we practiced rather fiscal responsibility for most of the time. He put his foot down on excessive state expenditure many times. At Solidarity, I was involved with negotiations in regards to SAA when we brought an application to have SAA liquidated. And with Minister Gordhan, we sat in a room with him and negotiated our position and our stance. And he said he's have to speak to the Minister of Finance because he needs capital. And Tito Mboweni said, no, I'm not going to give you any more. We can't afford it. So it shows you the strain and the stress there. So Tito Mboweni has been replaced very interestingly with Mr. Enoch Ngwana. Mr. Enoch Ngwana is the chairperson of the ANC Economic Transformation Committee, and he's occupied that position for quite some time. He was the one that proposed the amendment to Regulation 27, which corresponds with the Pension Fund Act, which he wants to enable greater investment and in a way compel investment from pension funds into state infrastructure in order to grow the economy. Yes, it came from his desk, that proposal to amend the regulation. And he's, as I said, he's the chairperson of the Economic Transformation Committee. And he's someone, he also, by the way, Scott, he also wears a hat like Becky Cele does. We've now got two ministers who fashions that round tip hat. But he's someone regarded as he's got political savvy. He can express himself in a good way, so he doesn't come off like he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's got some knowledge, but essentially he is a political animal, you can say. Essentially, he's the product of the ANC, and if we couple that, even though he's got a more or less favorable view, Enoch Ngwana, if you couple that with the sounds that Ramaphosa has been making of economic restructuring of the country, this would mean that there would be some significant changes in our economic structure with him. And I think before when we started the program, we mentioned the fact that economic restructuring is one of the most points of concern, and Ramaphosa will have to consolidate that, I think, in order to keep the balance of power within the ANC, so that he still has some savvy and some say to do so. And Enoch Ngwana seems to be the anointed person to lead this charge to change the economy. But he's fairly viewed as a middle ground man, but he's got some extreme ideas, so it will be difficult to say.
Now, you mentioned pension funds there. Now, we've got expropriation without compensation, which covers everything that's been brought into play. Wouldn't this put people's pensions at risk? Because they might say, well, look, even if you have a private pension, we're going to nationalize it now, and you will just get a SASSA grant every month, just like everybody else. Isn't this one of the risks of what's just happened?
Absolutely, it is. The pension debate and the ANC, Scott, to give them credit in a tongue-in-the-cheek sense in the way, is that they plan these policy positions actually to perfection. So the example of hammer and a nail. The ANC knows that they won't be able to push that nail in one shot. They need to tap, 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 and just constantly tap. And if there's resistance, they back off. Expropriation without compensation is a great example of that. Again, 10 years ago, if you had said expropriate without compensation, you would have a public uproar. But what they do is they sensitize you with this proposition of expropriation without compensation. And in relation to the Pension Fund and the Pension Fund Act and the regulations there, they have brought the policy position with huge resistance from the populace. we've got on our side. We've already got a few legal opinions. If they move on that, we will go to court. And then they saw massive resistance, and then they backed off a bit. So for the first round, what they would say is they would amend that regulation so that the state pension funds, the government employee pension fund, which is a state pension fund, they were being put able now to invest more in state infrastructure, in a way compelling them to do so. Now, first of all, just for clarity here, a pension fund, if there's a profitable investment, they do have the freedom to invest in it when the prospects would be profitable, which will include state infrastructure. If we had a working state and a functional state, and like many other countries, it wouldn't be off or wrong of a pension fund to say, I want to go into that, because there's this track record of profit in relation to that. There's a track record of a stable investment that they will have, a track record of a stable asset. But in our country, that's not the case. But the government needs money. I remember distinctively in 2019 when Ramaphosa replied in Parliament to a debate in relation to the state of the economy. He stated, and it was the headline on that specific debate on the television, he said, our resources have been depleted. And that is the reality. Our resources have been depleted. And that is why they will go down the road of expropriation without compensation with a broad theme, because property is not restricted to land. It is everything that can be considered of property. And on the pension fund, pensions is also something which they would like to get their fingers on, because they need the capital. And he was the architect, Enoch Ngugwana, of that proposal. And again, I qualify this by saying his view overall is that of a more not centrist, but a more a person who's a bit knowledgeable on the economy side, but in the same sense that can make him very dangerous to try and ease through these regulations, and he knows how to communicate it. So the pension fund thing is back on the table, but to contextualize it, for now it is on the government employee pension fund. It's not on it doesn't extend for the moment on others. And they will have a regulation that has to be amended through Parliament. There will be public comment, so it won't come overnight. And I say this, Scott, because when this was an issue, when it came about, we had many of our members contacting us to such an extent that we held a press conference to say to them that, firstly, we will combat this with everything we have, and we still will, but we should caution people not to withdraw their funds and withdraw their savings from the pension fund and try to from their pension fund and try and invest it elsewhere, because simply, especially if you are close to retirement, the investment growth is quite significant those last few years. You might be in a worse spot. And so I would just want to repeat that, although that threat possibly comes to the fore again, and we would need to fight it, but don't do any rash movements, I would say, although the concern is justified.
Now, in January this year, if I'm not mistaken, the ANC government brought in a 3-year freeze of moving your pension money overseas if you were emigrating. Now, don't you think one of the things that they could bring in under this new minister is, if you are leaving South Africa, you leave your pension behind. We're going to take it and use it for infrastructure.
It's definitely a possibility. They've set in that cap, and they want to, in a way, compel investments in their direction, and they want to discourage any form of investment abroad, or a too large of an investment abroad, and in a way, all of this would be back on the table. The fact that the resistance to this has been so strong, I think Enoch Ngugwana would tread very closely on how we dealt with this. Remember, the other context of the pension funds, apart from government running out of money, is the fact that the SOEs, Eskom sits with about a 500 billion rand debt. They will not be able, if they restructure, rebundle, they can do whatever they like, they will not be able to service that debt. The other state-owned enterprises as well. So they need that cash not only for state infrastructure, They need the pension money to be able to service state debt, which they incurred with taxpayer money. So all of this brings again a slippery slope on how they will now arrange the finances. So remember, Ramaphosa said our economy must be restructured, and if you look at the available options, these sort of things from the pension fund and some other options they have, these are the things that they will now closely pursue. So we will have to keep our ears on the ground, and we must act swiftly when there's any movement in regards to that.
Right. Now, just on a related issue, I believe the reason they want to bring in an NHI is because they can then elude the private health insurance funds, which have got a huge amount of money, do exactly what you're talking about them doing here to the pension funds. What are your thoughts on that? What is the actual motivation for an NHI? Is it just to loot the private health insurance funds, or is it because they're trying to help the people?
No, it's exactly the way you phrased it. They actually explicitly stated that is what would be necessary to centralize healthcare. They will establish a central fund, and all of the funds of the private sector health insurance companies and the private sector health, all of those funds must be allocated towards the central fund, and then government will redistribute it. And our private sector healthcare, Scott, as you would know, is one of the best in the world. We've got some of the best private sector healthcare services in the world. The state healthcare system has completely failed. It has completely failed. You can look to the township clinics, you can look to rural clinics, you can look to city clinics. You would find that it is totally depleted. And this shift to NHI is to actually gain complete control of healthcare, and it is nationalized healthcare. When this move started with the NHI, we saw at the Solidarity Movement and Solidarity Trade Union that they have not, in any sense of the word, even started to look what are the figures like to be able to afford their healthcare, even if you rank in the private healthcare facilities. They haven't even done all the sums. And when it was William Kize, when he was obviously still Minister of Finance, and his DG, they said they don't need to do the sums and trying to work out exactly what this will cost, because he won't be able to. But because it's the right thing to do, to have equal access to healthcare across the board, that should be our purpose. We shouldn't regard ourselves with the figures. So what we've done as Solidarity, we issued a report. We contracted some of the country's foremost economists and said that the governments cannot give us figures. We need to have something on this, and we've got that report. And we will also be happy to share the report with you, Scott, and also to your viewers. And what that report found is, if we assume that pre-COVID we had a 2.5, about 3% economic growth, we will by 2026 have a deficit of about 27 billion rand in the fiscus. 27 billion is quite a large hole. We will have about a 27 billion rand deficit in the fiscus. If everything, the best case scenario for this government is a 27 billion rand fiscus. And that is just for the first phase. That's just for the first rollout of the NHI. There's this massive deficit. What will happen if that fails? Because now the private sector healthcare facilities have been usurped by the central government. Now we don't have anything to fall back on. What happens then? What happens if you eat the private healthcare facilities? We've got nothing to fall back on. So the national healthcare is a priority of the ANC. They've confirmed it again at Nasrec in 2017. And that is another instance where they found significant resistance from the populace and from interest groups. So they've backed off a bit. There is a national healthcare insurance bill, which is as thick as a big textbook, and trying to point out how they will centralize it and what would happen. And so it's detailed. And completely what you said at the beginning is what they're essentially saying there, is to rake in all of those funds, have the private sector facilities dependent upon the state, and they want to roll it out. That bill has not yet been before Parliament for voting. But if they do, once again, that's another issue that we've got a legal opinion on. We've already got our papers ready if they want to move on that. And that's another very, very concerning phrase. So NHI is on the table as well with Minister Edok Inogana now.
Well, isn't that incredibly short-sighted? Because we've seen what happened in KwaZulu-Natal just last month. When you loot something, everything goes into disrepair, and the damage that's created to the economy is huge. Now, we're talking about looting pension funds, and we're talking about potentially looting private health insurance funds. What sort of damage long-term will that do to South Africa?
Well, let us look at a few countries where that has happened. If you look at what happened at Venezuela, Venezuela even started with expropriation without compensation. They didn't just overnight decide this. They also had some productivity quotas, which you must reach. And if you don't reach that criteria, then that land is deemed to be an access land, which the state can utilize for public purposes. And slowly but surely, they created a reality where they are the de facto owner of all of that land. The judiciary, Venezuela, and it's in South Africa increasingly the case as well, where you have judges appointed that are that corresponds largely with the dictates of the state. In March 2017, there was a media statement by the ANC where they said there should be greater emphasis on judges' how did they put it? A commitment to the transformation project of South Africa. In other words, not their qualifications as a judge, but greater emphasis on their commitment to the transformation project. So these are the sort of things that are just sliding in and are just reasons for concern. And the same with healthcare. And we saw how those countries look. Cuba is another example of not only how healthcare has totally tanked, but also water and sanitation. The water and sanitation department, after tonight's announcement, is now independent. They are now not independent. They are now separated from human settlements. And the water situation in the country, also the centralized water state that we have, is also diluted. So if these policies are going forward, the outcome of it would be like the countries we already had. But I want to mention another thing on this. A while back, I've read up on the Chinese Revolution, the Cultural Revolution in the late 1950s and early 1960s, where the programs that Mao Zedong had implemented in the country were devastated, and millions of people died of starvation. And I looked at those set of facts, and I also looked at other examples in the world. And the conclusion that I can make between them and us today is that our community here, Scott, is much better organized and much more fit to combat and provide resistance to these issues, because we must do so. In Zimbabwe, when you had the land grabs, there was a commercial farmers union there. And I remember listening to a talk of one of those farmers at a conference, and they said when those talks started, they didn't immediately see the threat. And when it finally came, when Mugabe implemented those devastating policies, that removal of land and the destruction of their agricultural economy, he said they were not prepared. They were not prepared to provide any form of resistance. On our side, there is a difference. On our side, we know the intentions of the governing party. We know that we must position ourselves in the strongest terms as possible to combat that. So although those sort of policy positions is concerning, we are very positive about the country in the sense that I told earlier, is that we've got faith and we've got confidence in our own ability to try and affect change, even if it's modest change. We know the programs, we know the nature of them, and we will continue to provide effective resistance with other South Africans, with other groups, and that is how you must combat this. We cannot lose hope. We cannot look at this and say we must immigrate. We are not going anywhere. Most of the South Africans obviously aren't going anywhere. And we have to deal with this reality in a manner that is most effective.
You know what it makes me think of, Werner, is that infamous statement by Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum, where he said, "You will own nothing, but you will be happy." I mean, really, is South Africa perhaps what they're doing like a test case for this whole thing?
That's an interesting point. Klaus Schwab is the guy, I think, that also writes on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, if I'm correct.
He did. The useless eaters. We are the useless eaters. Yeah, please go ahead.
No. So that's interesting thought, and it shows you that there is the growing tendency to have a disregard for ownership, for private ownership, a disregard for a direct say in matters of importance for communities. And but I think on the reality side of things, there are many people like our community as well, our communities in South Africa, which I think will simply not, they will not be able to fall for that. But it is an interesting perspective from him. And I think he spoke also about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the big tech taking larger and larger strides in society. But because we know the threat and we know the nature of it, I think we are better positioned, Scott, to provide resistance to it.
But we have a Trojan horse in South Africa, you know that. It's the Open Society Foundation. They are so intermingled with the ANC government. And you know, they're involved in preparing bills for the ANC government. They're totally unelected. And this is George Soros, who's one of the key players in the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset. So is it surprising we're going down that road?
Now, the similarities is startling, actually. And I think one of the things I believe that this industrial revolution and all of that goes together would be there's possible that it will have the opposite effect as well. It is possible that you will have a state and an ever-growing power, but their effectiveness will be greatly limited if they started to lose touch, become out of touch, or lose tabs on civil society and how they're organized in different manners. If we look at other developments in relation to how you can organize outside of the state and use various means of technology and communication and whatever is available at your means, you can effectively, in a way, distance yourself from a greater centralization. But on that topic, I need to read up a bit more in relation to between those forces and those movements, but I think it might have the opposite effect of what they intend and ultimately force a decentralized system which they then cannot control.
Well, I think your concept of independent communities is definitely the way to go. But I also would, I'll send you a video after this live stream where you will see that the world is basically run, the whole world is basically run by two large investment organizations, one called Vanguard and the other one called BlackRock. And you can do your own research on this. You can go to Coca-Cola, you can go to Pepsi, you can go to IBM, you can go to Facebook, you can go to any big multinational company you can think of. The two top shareholders in every single one are Vanguard and BlackRock. And
I would
Vanguard,
love to see the video.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. And Vanguard owns a substantial shareholding in BlackRock. And guess who the families are behind Vanguard? They're not actually, you've got to actually dig down, but you will find the names. They're people like DuPont, Rothschild, Rockefeller, Bush. These are the people who are actually running the world today. This is why the world is so controlled. I found it very interesting that with this whole coronavirus, I've got to be careful what I say here because we're censorship city here on YouTube, but I'll just make an observation.
Yes.
All the countries of the world went down in lockdown at the same time. It was almost like someone pulled a switch and said, okay, time for a lockdown. The vaccines came out, and the rhetoric on the mainstream media, wherever you are in the world, is the same. You have to have the vaccine. If you don't have the vaccine, then you're not doing the right thing. Now, I've got to, again, be very careful what I say here. If you go to lovinglifetv.com, you'll see my thoughts on this whole issue, but I cannot express them here. But I will send you that video, because in that same video, you will see that George Soros and Bill Gates are very, very close. They're like bed buddies. You know, they're involved in so many different areas together. It's almost like different aspects. We talk about the ministries here of the ANC government. It's almost like these super rich families are carving out different areas of our lives that they are now going to control, and they will be like the new bona fide one world government, with Bill Gates in charge of our health, George Soros in charge of human resources or whatever. But this is where it looks like it's all going when you look at what these guys are doing, how they're actually formulating alliances, and it is very, very scary. But look, I don't know
a lot about that, so I would, you can kindly forward it to me.
I'll forward it to you. But just be aware that there are two huge investment organizations worth trillions of dollars. The actual ownership is unknown of Vanguard, which is the biggest. And they basically run the world today. You know, they talk about where you have a monopoly. And Google can't do this because it's got a monopoly over this particular thing, so it's got to break up into a different piece, etc., etc. When you look at the involvement of the major big tech companies in the world today, all of them are owned by Vanguard and BlackRock. They're the ones who are telling these companies what to do. Now, surely that's where the monopoly is, not at the level of the actual business that they're doing. This is the great hypocrisy that people do not realize. It's quite extraordinary. Anyway, let's get back to we got right off the target there. Let's get back to the ministerial changes tonight. And I want to in particular focus on one. I didn't hear reference to Becky Cele.
No reference at all.
Isn't that surprising?
If we had made a small bet before his speech, I might have placed some money on a possible change in the Ministry of Police, because he's part of the security cluster. He's actually the leader of the security cluster, the Minister of Police. And he was contradicting the State Security Minister. The State Security Minister was contradicting Becky Cele. Becky Cele was the one that was woefully unprepared. He doesn't even know. I saw an interview of him a while back where they asked him, who is the National Police Commissioner? And he said he doesn't know. It's still in the balance, and there's a process. And the interviewer was astounded. It was on ENCA, astounded by the fact that the minister doesn't know the status of the National Police Commissioner. And so he kept his skin. And so there was some other trade-offs that had to be made. Kakula of the Ministry of Defense has been shifted completely out.
Thandi Modise is now there. Now, let's talk about Thandi Modise. I mean, she was the Speaker of the Parliament. Okay, now she still is. Well, she still is. Now, AfriForum took her to court over the 50 plus animals that died on her farm because they weren't looked after, and for some reason she just got a free pass. And now here she is with that sort of complete disregard of the health of animals on a farm, being in charge of defense. What does that say to you?
It's that pictures of those animals on the farm it tears you apart. AfriForum through Advocate Gerry Nel took it to court, and they've appealed the matter now. So the matter will be appealed, verdict of not guilty. And they said that actually the route that they followed is that the case of AfriForum wasn't strong enough to convict her, and she was let off on that. But that is being appealed. And they had a technical legal route to get there. And they say for her to be found guilty, she is the one physically that had to be at the farm the entire time and neglected the animals. But we know the farm belongs to her. She's the one that acquired the cattle and the other animals there at the farm.
And stuff,
and
yeah.
she's the one that bears responsibility to do so. And now she said, no, you must, I'm the wrong person before the court. You must get the farm manager or someone that is in my employ and reports to me, but you must get them to court. So we've appealed that. But it's a disgrace that has not gained even more traction in the ANC circles, and that also not has become a sort of a scandal. It was simply something that flew by in their radar. They didn't even make a statement on that, on how they view that. Now she's the Minister of Defence, so I guess she will be spend even less time at her farm after this appointment. And it's an interesting move. You would find that Tandi Modise and others, obviously the minister in the presidency and the deputy minister in presidency is being perceived as being allies close to Ramaphosa. So definitely there's a few names which is closer to Ramaphosa, and he has distanced himself to an extent of those which are viewed to be against him. So that was an interesting shift as well, and obviously. What is also interesting is the shift of the Ministry of Public Services. Now, there was a long battle on the state salaries. So the labor unions, they debated and tried to negotiate a higher and higher salary for the state officials. The state is the biggest employer in this country. They've got too many people under the employ of the state. And Senzo Mkhunu, who was the Minister of Public Services, has been moved away to water and sanitation now. So that tells us the movements around the ANC structures in relation to that negotiations weren't going very well. They did settle on 1.5% raise, but it seems to me that Senzo Mkhunu, who negotiated that, had to be shifted aside. And apart from that, I think for now, those are, I would say, the interesting shifts in this cabinet reshuffle. There would be a lot of analysis going on through this year, but most definitely the greatest shock was Tito Mboweni and to see what's Enoch going to do now.
Well, I noticed that Ramaphosa said he appealed to Tito not to resign, but he said he was going to.
Yep.
Now, who do you think the big winner out of this shuffle is? Because you got two camps who hate each other. You've got the, if I can call them, the corruption camp, which is Ace Magashule, the Jacob Zuma followers, and those sort of guys on the one side, and then on the other side you got the Ramaphosa camp. Which camp do you think won out of this cabinet reshuffle?
And I think most definitely. Yeah, sorry, Scott.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, I think on that score, I would say this is a win for Ramaphosa. He has in a way consolidated his influence in a certain way, and he has successfully marginalized the other camp, let's call it the Magashule camp. And another reason why he would be in a stronger position is that the faction or the other group or whatever you want to call it, they know a complete breakdown of the party wouldn't serve them as well. They want the ANC to remain strong, and they want to, with a strong, united ANC, be able to further their agenda of radical economic transformation and everything that goes with it. And the reason why Ramaphosa, I would say, is in a stronger position is the fact that we do have elections coming up, whether it's 27 October this year, which is actually, as it stands, we are having elections on 27 October. It's 3 months or 2 months or so away. The IEC have to apply to postpone the date no later than February 2020. It might be still this year. The point is this, that other grouping cannot afford a ANC that disbands before an election. So if the ANC loses significant support, support, and they are pushed down the threshold of 50%, and the opposition parties and smaller parties can grow, that faction will lose as well. So the timing for the, let's say, the Magashule faction, there are many factions and groupings within the ANC, but if we divide it into two, the Magashule camp would not want a ANC which is not strong because it doesn't serve them. Their best timing to go at Ramaphosa would be after an election and at a policy conference which ANC will have again, and they will then try to further and advance the position that he has not delivered on NHI because it's still before Parliament, the bill. They would say he has not delivered on EWC because that is not yet through Parliament, and they will focus on these points to try and compromise his position. But now it's not a good timing, and I believe that Ramaphosa is the stronger one after this reshuffle.
Right. Now, just on the two factions, what happened in Durban last month clearly had ANC written all over it. Now, Ace Magashule is a guy who seems to be in close contact with the ANC branches, and it looked very obvious to me that the ANC branches were somehow involved in what happened. And the thing that worries me is that you've just had a huge cabinet reshuffle. You've now got Thandisi Modise in charge of the army or the defense force. She won't have had time to really get her head around the job, if she ever could in the first place, but let's leave that for another day. But the point I'm making is that on the 10th of August, there's talk of another riot taking place in KZN. How are the new cabinet going to cope with that sort of situation because they're so new to their jobs? And secondly, if I may just add, this is the second point, is the rioting and the looting that is clearly stemming from factions of the ANC being done to basically disrupt the leadership of the ANC under Ramaphosa?
I think that's what they're going for them. Ramaphosa confirmed tonight, that's the second part of his speech tonight, and I think that was a welcome admission on his side to say they were not prepared. But their solution to the unpreparedness is to set up another commission or another panel.
Yes, another wise panel of people. Yeah.
You know, more regulation, more people, more commissions, and that's how they respond to problems. They don't go to the core of the problem. They try and live with the problem, if I might add. So the fact that they admitted they were unprepared 3 weeks ago means that they will be unprepared if something happens on 10 August. So they will be unprepared. They won't be ready to be able to combat any sort of riot or a new uprising, which the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC this morning, Jesse Duarte, said it's a false alert. It's not. The indications aren't strong of anything of that. But first thing is they will not be prepared. They don't have the capacity to be prepared. The capacity of the police, the defense force, the intelligence, all of that have been hollowed out completely. They don't have the capability, the expertise, or the skills to truly be able to manage a situation like that and trying to address it in a meaningful way. They don't have that. So that's the first point. The second part, in relation to the interesting thing about how do we factor in the fact that let's call it the Magashule camp, still have a influence on ground level to resort to some sort of disruption. I think what is an important thing to note is how do we view Ramaphosa's power or influence? So my view is he's definitely stronger here, but stronger and in a more empowered position doesn't mean it's a safe or a stable position. I think it's highly precarious. I think it is something that can change in a heartbeat, the different struggles. The other thing, although the Magashule, the other side, have been marginalized to a large extent through the disciplinary procedures of the ANC and so forth, you don't need a majority of support to be able to topple things around and trying to create an unstable or a state of anarchy in order to create a vacuum and to consolidate your power. You only need a minority. You don't need a majority. You need a minority of those who want to advance sort of a violent uprising against and trying to create some vacuum. So that is still alive. My sense is that the support for Ramaphosa in the NEC and now in cabinet and in parliament as well, on that national level, the weight will topple towards himself. The Magashule side is he's got still a considerable amount of influence on the branches of the ANC. It was under Ace Magashule that the membership of the ANC went over 1 million during his term thus far, and also he is known for someone who focuses very strong on branches. So what I'm saying is he's got the influence probably to rattle things up in relation to the branches, and you don't need a majority to create an influence there. So that would be an interesting thing that we would need to see play out before the 27th of October or later, to see to what extent does the branches act in defiance of the ANC and Ramaphosa and what effect it might have. So that is still a possibility, absolutely.
Right. Now, obviously, we've got to throw Carl Niehaus and the MK into that mix as well. But look, I've got a bunch of questions here that people have sent me. I've just selected a few of them. I'm going to put to you. Garnett's asked, Andre Jacobs asked, the ANC has stolen and murdered, so what will stop them from removing our property rights?
Yeah. Can I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
If you look at if we see how this will come and how they will start and move on property and farms, the bill, the expropriation bill. So you've got the constitutional amendment, which is very concerning, and I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion that you and Rob Hutchinson had on that topic. It's very concerning. What it does, and I just want to contextualize it. One of the things that EWC and the constitutional amendment does, it throws open public purpose. So you have a 1976 Act, which is an expropriation act, which says that they may expropriate land with compensation, obviously, but for a public purpose or a public good. And that would be something like a road that it cannot, or train track, which cannot be in any other place than there. And then there's a fair compensation bill. That is totally bona fide and acceptable all over the world.
Well, I think countries all over the world have that.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a 1976 Act.
Yeah.
But the difference with EWC is that they fashioned it within the context of addressing past discriminatory laws and past discrimination and disparities. And they say there might be situations where the public good or the public interest now, not necessarily public purpose, but the public interest, is such that Fani van der Merwe's farm is of the public interest to give this to this family or these people here. There's no objective standard. They are the ones that have to determine the public interest, and then you can go to court if you want to, but that's the context where it is. Then the bill goes further. Then we move to the...
Werner, with the going to court aspect, I understand that the party that's tried to take the land away from the owner has his costs covered by the state, whereas the actual the farmer whose land they're trying to take away has to cover his own legal costs. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Crazy.
So you can, on your own accord, it's preposterous. It's preposterous. You can, on your own accord, go to court. And the other thing that this has, as soon as there is a claim of this nature, as soon as there's this political attention on a piece of land, what it does, it immediately halts any investment on that property.
Exactly.
For as long as it's disputed, because it doesn't make sense. If this is a disputed land by some people and they want to expropriate it, it doesn't make sense to use your farm implements and to invest further and expand, you actually start retracting. So that farm becomes dormant in a way if the dispute goes on for years, which is in many times the case in this country, that it goes on for years and years and years, and the farmer is drained out of cash. So if the state believes there's a case to further, and there's a community with a claim also, they can completely ruin the farmer, because the costs are very, very expensive. The time to go through courts and the processes is quite long. It isn't effective at all. So I'm not in any sense saying that the court procedure is a fair procedure in this, but it's something which the bill says is an option, and they want to have their own land expropriation. It's not called the expropriation court, but it's something with farming and land court that they want to establish to specifically focus now on these sort of disputes. But going further on the bill, so how it will work is that you will have to give up you'll have to give access to your farm or your land to this state agent or this state official that comes, and they can come and inspect it. So you can't say, this is my property now. You cannot enter. You must give them way to come into your land, to do a survey or capacity determination, or what their services, what they would want to do, and then they would go. So on the question of the viewer, what would stop them, although this is a very concerning frame, what would stop them is the fact that I believe that when that day comes, when there will be a presence of state officials or anything of the sort on many farms in South Africa, I think the community will have a very, very strong presence there. You can imagine, Scott, the farming community's communication and their codes and their support is overwhelming. They are very well organized. They know how to get to each other quickly. They know how to ensure that they are safe, and they've got a keen interest in keeping tabs and knowledge and insights on the latest happenings. If there's word of a state official or anything coming, those network of farmers will know it, and they will be able to respond in a responsible manner, like we know our farmers and how they do things. So the threat is there, but again, I would resort to the fact that I know that we are better organized. If we weren't ready, we will just be an open target. But I believe that we are well organized to be able to give a response to any sort of violence at a place. And just to add, you found that those looting and the violence that we had during the riots, many places they didn't even dare going, because they knew there will be resistance there. And it means that we must remain calm and organize quicker and faster.
That's why the police service is absolutely a disgrace. Now, I just want to add on to what you're talking about here, because I'm doing a video later tonight. I had a correspondence from Susan Pletz, and Susan was very involved in, the democratization of South Africa, and she played a very active role in that. And she wrote me a lengthy email. And I want to take 2 paragraphs out of that email and just recite it here, because it's so relevant to what we're talking about here. And she says, then it happened. The BMF, Black Management Forum, of which I was once a member, even though I was white, started pressing government to remove white women from the historically disadvantaged list on the Black Economic Empowerment score sheet. My daughter and I were both white women, owning the company that ran the project. The company was formed on the insistence of the funders of the project. The BMF achieved its objective when late in 2014, the government did just as they were pressed to do. White women were removed from the historically disadvantaged list. At that point, the project had 3,500 tons of produce waiting for harvest. The value of this produce was in the region of 17 million rand. It was here that a corporate from Johannesburg wielded a blow. They refused to buy the produce until we, as 2 white women, removed ourselves from the project. After consultation and decisive action, we handed the project over to 2 young black men belonging to the youth sector of society and belonged to YARD, the Youth in Agriculture and Rural Development, as we believed they were the future of the country. How wrong we were. They took possession of the company and the assets, and after we facilitating the introduction to the corporate representative, they signed an agreement. Does Africa abide by signed agreements? I lift my eyebrows as I look at history. After receiving possession of the company and assets, the 2 never graced any sector of the project with their presence, let alone trucks to load up produce and get it marketed. 1,200 people were left abandoned by their own people. Now, this is just one of thousands of examples of what's happening in South Africa today. What hope is there?
You're completely right. If you look at that specific set of facts, as sad and tragic as it is in no way an exception. It is actually the rule, especially to land reform. More than 90% of the land reform projects in South Africa has failed. People are provided with land which they cannot farm on because they don't have the expertise. They use, in many instances, productive land, and then they turn it into squatter camps and create a sort of a rent arrangement where they get rent from the occupiers, so they don't farm on the land. And you can go through each and every sector of society. It has started at the top, and it has been rattled through every sector of society to see what can be extracted. There's an interesting book I've read on why nations fail. And one of the most characteristic features of failing nations is a state that extracts value and asset and anything that you can think of from the population. So again, if we look at that set of facts, we are confronted with the situation to ask what hope is there. And what this confirms is that there cannot be hope in a country where the ANC is in charge of determining a future, because we know where those policies ultimately will lead. But if we look at what we find hope in, I am not one of those, and I would suspect you not also, Scott, and I think many other people as well. You don't look at a specific set and look at a government or an authority to provide you hope. In other words, that if they do their work, then you are hopeful. If they don't their work, you've got nothing left to do. We are in this country in a very interesting time, and that is that we are forced to look at alternatives. We are forced to not hinder back to the past and say, I want it back the way it was 50 years or 40 years ago. It is not looking forward and saying that I would like to have an ANC future. It's looking at where hope lies within your community, and it starts in small incremental steps. And you can look at that through every aspect of society. It will start with you getting involved in your community safety forum after work, receiving training and expertise and skills and so forth. It would start you getting with your school and see, how can I make my school independent from the state? And how can I fashion the school program in such a manner that, as far as it can be, that we will continue to receive quality education? It will mean that we look at a town which is very small, like Orania, and see, don't they represent an ideal that is much bigger than we maybe think? And in short, what we must do is we must concentrate more. South Africa is a country where people are quite dispersed. People who view things the same way will naturally concentrate more on an area, and from there on, from a ground level up, you can start affecting change. So the hope does not lie in that which you've mentioned, the state policies and program. The hope will lie within ourselves as communities, and I think in a large extent, Scott, in South Africa, we are in a way in the future, if you look at other countries, especially in Europe, the challenges that they are starting to face, and to see how they can start organizing themselves especially with the immigration situation in Europe and a few other issues there. In a way, we are in front in relation to how we can come when a larger state is starting to implode. So I think we are in an advanced stage comparing to other countries. So my hope lies with my faith and my community and my people to effect change when it seems like there can be no other change. So the hope question is so important because I've got many friends asking me they want to immigrate and they can't see a future for their children here. It's such a understandable position. It's a position that I don't criticize. I understand it completely. But I think if we look at the opportunity that this presents us, the fact that the country is going down a different road, it presents a much greater opportunity for us to see what we can build ourselves, which I've mentioned. So I do have hope, not in the ANC or in government. There can't be any hope. That's the reality. But I do have hope in the communities of South Africa to start effecting change.
Right. Now, look, that community side, I think is an absolutely fantastic option for South Africa. How do people watching this video now or later get either in touch with you or find out more information about this project? What's the easiest way to do that?
Thank you for this, Scott. There's a website that they can visit, and I think that will be a great start. And I'm also willing to give my email address. If people want to maybe learn more, then I will personally refer them to further information and further people of influence to give even more information. And my job at the Solidarity Movement is I'm involved in a way in everything that we do on a strategic level, from the educational side to the solidarity side and the other institutions as well. So I'm very privileged to have access to everything that we do. But as we are a big team which works on their specific field, they know much better in depth of all these different topics. So I would be glad to refer them there. And we've got a website, www.beweging, and I'll spell beweging now, .co.za. Beweging is spelled BEWEGING.co.za. BEWEGING.co.za. That is the homepage of the Solidarity Movement. And if you get to the homepage, you would firstly, if you see on the left corner, I believe, or in the middle left, there's an option Afrikaans and English. So if you're Afrikaans speaking, you can just continue with the page in Afrikaans. In English, there's an option for English. Then you will see there's a scroll page down, which you can click upon. And there you would find our institutions listed there with their websites. AfriForum, Solidarity, Helping Hands, all of those institutions are lined there. And the Beweging, that movement internet website, is a sort of a gateway to the different institutions that we have in our movement. And if we take some time and go through all 23 institutions, it is absolutely amazing and startling what we could have done with only our membership money. Scott, if I may mention Soltec, I'm not sure if the viewers might be familiar with the existence of Soltec. Now, if I may take a moment, I'll be quick. The technical colleges in South Africa has declined rapidly to the extent that there's no more quality technical colleges. Now, what about those who are inclined and who have skilled in technical affairs and technical matters? What happens to them when those institutions fail them? Our answer was to build our own Technikon. If the viewers would Google Soltec, and that is spelled SOLTECH, you will find the pictures of that Soltec building.
It's a beautiful
massive
building. It cost something like 13 million rand, didn't it, to build?
It's almost 300 million.
300 million
in total. Almost 300 million in total. We were under budget with that, and we finished that building within 40 days before the deadline. If you should compare that to a state tender, you will see it's
amazing what you achieved. I've seen it's a huge complex.
And what the viewers must know, the biggest donation we received for that was 10 rand. But what we did is we took many 10 rands and were able to build that Saltic. We have a building fund where people can be member of. And they can be a member by contributing 100 Rand or 80 Rand. And how we started with this building fund is we took 10 Rand from our membership fee and started the building fund. And then we waited and we grew the fund. Then the fund grew to such an extent that we can start and develop property and look to acquire some property for this. And this is how this building came about. It is through many, many, many small donations. We established an institution that will surpass my lifetime and will be available there for my children to receive quality technical education, which is not really more available. We've started academia, which is a higher educational institute on the same basis, small contributions from many, many people, and we can build an institution that is sustainable for the next generation. That is a type of work and approach we have. We have no donations or anything from the state, obviously, no subsidies, nothing, not a cent, because we know if you start going down that hole, you will become dependent upon the state, and they can dictate to you what you must do. So we're completely private, and we are funded by members through small contributions. It's an honor to be part of that movement. And if your viewers want to learn more, they are most welcome to look at what we do and how we do it by visiting that website.
Well, look, I'll put the website address below the video in the description so people can just click on that and go straight to your website. But look, I think that what you guys are doing is absolutely fantastic. I take my hats off to you. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you tonight. We've been going for 2.5 hours, so I appreciate your patience. And Ramaphosa did put his foot in the live stream tonight, but there was no way we could avoid that. But thank you so much, Werner. And look, I'm going to ask you to just perhaps make a closing statement to people who are listening here tonight, to just on perhaps some hope for the future, some more thoughts about the community concept that you're involved in. Over to you.
Thank you, Scott. And since you have an international audience and an audience in Australia and an audience in South Africa, I will try to keep my statements brief, but which would be appealing to all. I think on South Africa, I would say, if you look at our history, there was never a time when there was no sort of a challenge that faced us. And if you look at the history of this country, we never actually had any government that lasted longer than 50 years. When the Dutch came in 1652, you had a brief British presence in 1703, and it went on with British occupation again, acquired in 1806. In 1850, we had the Boer republics, Transvaal and the Free State. In 1902, we lost the Anglo-Boer War. In 1910, we became a union. In 1948, the National Party came to power. In 1994, the ANC government. We had all of these transitions. And as a community, we have been surviving in Africa for almost 400 years. And the reason why we survived in Africa for almost 400 years and where we are is because we are principled, we are value-driven people who have a goal in mind, and we can adopt our strategies and how we do things by acknowledging the reality that we face head on. For us, that reality is that we are a minority in a country, that we are dispersed quite widely in the country, and that we would want to have a future where we do not decide on the future of other people, where we do not oppress or be the people that have a lasting say on the lives of other people. But we will not allow that the same thing happens to us, where we are reduced, and I'm talking about all the citizens in a way as well, reduced to second-class citizens. So we will not accept that as well. And what we've seen in the future, that if you keep on doing the right thing, even though it seems very far away or very impossible to reach, if you stay that way and you are honest with where we are, you can, through institutions which we have established and community participation institutions, you can actually create a sustainable future You can actually create a future for yourself. And my message there would be to remain hopeful in perspective of South Africa, but know that you place your hope not in a centralized state, but in your faith, if you are a person of faith, but in your community, in your family, and ultimately that will lead to free institutions that will be sustainable for generations to come. How do we plan? Lastly, we look at the situation and we plan 3 generations ahead. We look at things and say, where will we need to be 3 generations ahead? That's why Urania is a particular interest of us. That is why the educational institutions are a particular interest, because we need that institutions in order to impart our knowledge and our heritage and our civilization. And that is where our focus is. Scott, thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to speak to you. Thank you for the viewers this evening that have taken the time to listen through everything, including the cabinet reshuffling. And I hope that what we've shared tonight might be for someone that they learned something and that they developed a greater interest in the country, and also to know that there are people here that will stay in this country, and we will do what is necessary to be able to live here free and have a normal life.
Fantastic. And please let your management know that the Loving Life community fully support Solidarity, Help and Handa, AfriForum, the whole organization. We think you're doing an amazing job. Now, before I let you go, I've had one question and one request. I'll put the question to you and I'll tell you what the request is. Jean-Pierre Labuschagne says, please ask Werner what his stance is on the United Nations and their subsidiaries. And the second, the request was, would you mind closing this live stream in a prayer? So I'll put the question to you first, and then if you'd like to close with a prayer, please do so.
I will do so. Scott, I am where my position stands on the UN and the WHO and all of those things going on. I don't have a favorable view of them at all, and the EU as well. And that what is occurring in the United States under the Biden administration as well. What I see is in Europe is the nation states are trying slowly but surely usurping the powers. The EU is usurping their powers. I was in Hungary a month back. I should share with you a few thoughts on Hungary. What a fantastic country that is, and a fantastic people, especially how they view the role of government and the role of the EU and so forth. But I don't have much knowledge further than in relation to the UN and their workings and the subsidiaries. Safe to note that it's an entity that I will not trust. It's an entity that I believe is on a power structure level is doing what we all know, and that is to usurp more power. They've got some institutions there, Human Rights Commission and all of those things, which purport to project change, and we try to utilize whatever channels we can to bring to light what has happened in this country. So we've, for example, laid a complaint about race-based quotas before CERT, which is CERT is the combating and eradication of racial discrimination. So we will use those channels to highlight the issues that we have. But on the position of the UN, it's a body that is too big and a body that we will not we will not trust because of its position to have greater and greater influence on countries. But I do admit that I'm not as knowledgeable of all the inner workings of the UN except for that which I've just shared.
Yeah, well, I'll send you that video very shortly after this live stream. But yeah, Werner, if you wouldn't mind closing the live stream in prayer, that'd be fantastic.
I will do so. Thank you, Scott. Ons almagtige God en Hemelse Vader, Here, ons dank U vir die genade wat U vir ons gee. Ons dank U vir die liefde wat U vir ons gee. Ons bid dat U ons sal kalm maak en ons sal seën met U wysheid. Ons bid vir ons kinders en ons bid vir hulle toekoms. En ons bid ook vir die land, sodat die burgers van die land geïnspireer kan word deur U wat hulle seën en uiteindelik ons op 'n punt bring om 'n toekoms te bou soos wat U dit bedoel het. Our Lord and Father, we thank You for tonight that You've blessed this interview. We ask You to bless the channel and the work that Scott is doing. We thank you for the faithful listeners to this channel, and we pray that you would bless South Africa and the citizens of this country and inspire us and provide us with wisdom on how to trickle through difficult times and to trickle and find a way that will serve the purpose of ultimately serving you. May we remain faithful in all of our endeavors to you and your will, and we praise your name, and we pray that you will bless us this evening further and also bless our children. We pray it in our Lord's name. Amen.
Amen. Werner, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much, and I hope we can have you on again in the future. And I'll leave that in Marlena's capable hands. But have a great evening. Keep up the fantastic work that you're doing. That building that you referred to earlier, the one that is cost 300 million rand, absolutely amazing project. I followed that very closely, and it just shows what can be done in South Africa. And your organization is leading the way on that.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay, guys, look, I'm going to wrap up this live stream now. And I just once again want to thank Werner for joining us. And I want to thank our moderators for looking after the side chat and keeping the trolls away. And please share this link with your family and friends or on your social media groups so that we can get the message out there. Take care, and I'll leave the side chat open for a short while so that you can say your goodbyes to each other. Cheers, Werner. Take care.
Yes. Thank you, Scott. Have a good evening.
Okay. Bye for now.